Hi, I'm Earl Campbell and welcome to Pro Italia Motors. We've had a lot of requests over the past several years on wanting us to make a video on how to adjust the Desmo valves. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's go in the back and I'll introduce you to Bobby Weindorf, my service manager, and he'll take you through the steps on adjusting a 2-valve Desmo head. And hopefully at the end of this video you'll feel very comfortable working on your own motorcycle and adjusting your valves. It's not as difficult as everybody makes it out to be. Today we're going to use a 1993 750 Super Sport, very similar to the 900 SS and the 907. So Bobby's going to share all of his experiences with you, and good luck.
Before you get started, you're going to need some of these special tools on hand.
This is the engine turning tool, which bolts onto the crankshaft so we can spin the engine to get it in this place where we need to make our adjustments. This is a homemade piece of wood, and it could be almost anything, soft aluminum or something, to hold the rocker arm down while you're removing the closing shim. Here's a little pencil magnet, and it's real handy for catching the half rings that hold the closer shim up. Next these are the little adjusting pieces for making your measurements on your closing shims. That's a factory Ducati piece. This is a homemade tool for holding up the valve while you're doing your adjustments on the closing shim to keep it from dropping down. It goes through the spark plug hole. You're going to need a good micrometer, preferably in millimeters, because that's how the shims come measured, for making all your measurements. Here's the cam belt adjusting tool. It's sort of a spring thing, and that's what you need to set proper belt tension. For the older Ducatis, there's two-part tools you're going to need. One is a pin extractor that's going to pull out the rocker pin because they don't have the quick release clip like the newer bikes do. And then also you're going to need an alignment tool to line up the shims and the rocker arm after you've taken it out to make your adjustments. So those two are for the older bikes. Newer bikes don't need to use that. Right now I've already got the bike pre-prepped, which means the motor is dead cold. I've already removed the seat. I've got the tank flipped up. All the necessary bodywork is out of my way. First thing I'm going to do is remove the batteries, positive lead and the negative lead, the vent tube, get all those off and slide that baby out of there. Next thing you want to do is take the spark plugs out. And some bikes have different size plugs. Just make sure you got the right wrench for that. On the 900s and 750s, it's necessary to remove the rear shock absorber to get to the rear valve cover. So you need to stabilize the bike. The best thing is to have a rear stand on the bike. Got a little hydraulic jack here. You can use a car jack or something. And what you want to do is jack it up a little bit, take some tension off the bolts, remove the top bolt. Remove the back bolt. And then there's a nut on the opposite side of the back bolt, so make sure you grab that. And once you have both the bolts out, we're going to jack the bike up a little bit more to take the tension off of the shock itself and raise it up enough so we can clear the swing arm to slide the shock out of there. As you pull it out, the two O-rings on the upper pivot mount, watch those. If you don't know they're just going to fall down the engine and you'll never even know you're missing them. You want to take them off, clean them up, just hang on to them. Next thing you want to do, if your bike's got an oil cooler, unbolt that from the front valve cover and pull it off underneath. So now we're going to take the valve covers off. The front exhaust valve cover holds oil. It's got about 20 cc's of oil behind that cover. So what you want to do is get a drain pan, especially if you're doing it on your mom's carpet or something. Get a drain pan, loosen the bolts up. Usually I loosen the bottom bolts up first, all the way out. Then I just loosen up the top ones a little bit. Valve cover, pop it open, let all the oil drain out, and then I take the valve cover the rest of the way off. Now to remove the upper valve covers, and all the rest of the valve covers actually, I have a special tool that I made, but you can use a regular Allen wrench or an Allen on a socket. I've got this kooky T-handle thing that just all it does is speeds things up. It doesn't make it any easier. Just more convenient for me because I do 1,000 of these things a day. Sometimes when you're taking the valve covers off, they want to stick to the cylinder head. Usually you can just take a little hammer or something and just tap on them and they'll pop free. And it'll come right off. When you take the valve covers off, you want to clean them up real good. Take the old gaskets off them. The gaskets, you know, if they stick to the head or to the valve cover, you got to scrape them off, get them real clean. It's real important to avoid leaks. And always use new gaskets when you reassemble this. It's very important. Now we've got the valve covers off, we're going to put the engine turning tool in. This tool goes on the left-hand side. It's the alternator cover on all the bikes. Same tool for all the bikes. You're going to undo one of the screws for the cover, take it all the way out. The other one you can just loosen up about 3 turns, swing the cover out of the way. There's an O-ring behind there. Keep an eye on it. If it falls out, don't lose it. Most of the time it just stays inside the cover, so you're cool. You're going to put the tool in. It's got either 1 or 2 little pins, and you'll see there's like little notches on the end of the crankshaft. Line up the pins with the notches, start the bolt in there, crank it tight. Make it good and tight because you don't want it to slip. The cylinder you're going to be working on, bring it to top dead center. The easiest way to do this is to watch the intake rocker arm, watch it open, and then it'll close.
It's opening. It's closing.
Then you'll feel a rush of air coming out from there. That's the compression stroke. After you feel the air rush out, look in your little sight window, and you should see 2 dots. You want to line up with the dot that's on the right-hand side, or some bikes only have 1 dot, and you want to line up with that dot. Do it 2 or 3 times to make 100% sure, because if you do it wrong, you're going to have some crazy readings. Now we're going to go to checking the valves. The first one you want to check is your closing shim. And you're going to take your fingers, reach in there, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but you're going to make your closer check first, and then check your opening shim.
You should have feeler gauges that read both American and metric, preferably metric, because it is a European bike and everything is measured metrically.
For the ease of viewing and clarity, and just so it makes it easier for you guys to see how this all works, I'm going to do it on a bench, and it's exactly the same as what you got in your bike. Here's a little tour of the valve train. First we have the opening shim. Here's a closing shim. The helper spring that helps the valve seal at idle. Valve guide seal. The clip, which you remove to slide the rocker arm sideways when you're making adjustments. Valve stem. The opening rocker. The closing rocker. And this is how it all works.
Okay, your first check you're going to do is for the closing shim here. So first thing you want to do is reach in there and see if you can spin your closer. You should be able to rotate it with a little bit. It should have a fair amount of pressure on it, but not impossible. If you can barely rotate it or it's super hard, it's probably too tight, and it's hard to measure that. So you just need to make your adjustment so it's just looser and go from there. But most of the time, they're going to be a little loose. So you'll feel it. You should be able to spin it. Okay, now you're going to take your fingers and push down hard on it to overcome the helper spring. And you shouldn't hear any clicking or be able to feel any movement at all. Sometimes, if you can, on some of the bikes, get a little screwdriver in there, and that'll give you a little help. I don't know if you can see that, but we got some play there, so it's loose. And you always got to do the closers first, so now we need to make an adjustment on there before we do the openers. So here's how we get to it. We're going to pry off the clip up on top here on the upper rocker arm. And make sure you watch that so it doesn't go flying across the room. Little spring clip. Okay, now to move the rocker arm, see how it's going to slide sideways into that opening we just made. you need to rotate the engine. So use your engine turning tool, and you'll be rotating it, and you'll be turning the cam at the same time. But you rotate it to the point where it'll pop right over. Okay, now we've got the rocker arm out of the way. Now we can measure how much clearance we need. You got the engine on top dead, back up to top dead center. And you can see we're still got, there's our play right there. So we need to take up that amount of play. So, ready to get in the ballpark? Let's get out our feeler gauges and make a measurement. Take our feeler gauge, put it between the rocker arm, lower rocker arm, and the closing shim. And it's probably going to be a little tough to get in there, but you can get in there and get a measurement. And if it's really hard to get in there, you're probably pretty close to being perfect. It's almost a feel type thing, and it's hard to explain. But if you can visibly see it moving and get a feeler gauge, then you can pretty much figure you're way out of the ballpark on the adjustment. So once you got your measurement, you need to get that shim out of there. So I'm going to rotate the engine again to where you can push the valve down. This tool, which we use to hold a closing rocker down while we're changing the shims, actually started out life as the handle to this wooden brush. We cut it off, shaved it down so I could slide it in there nice and easy. Just speeds things up and makes it a lot easier just to change the shims while it holds the rocker arm out of the way. Now we've got the rocker arm held down. You see we lift the valve up. Here's another homemade tool. This used to be a hose removal tool, cut down. This is what we go through the spark plug hole and holds the valve up while you're taking the closing shim off to keep the valve from dropping down into the cylinder. It goes inside, and what you're going to do is just let it sit there to keep the valve from going anywhere. Okay, now that you've got the rocker arm compressed and you've got everything free, you'll be able to slide the closing shim down and expose the half rings. Take a little magnet and grab the half rings. When you're removing the half rings, you want to be very careful because they're small, they're slippery because they're covered with oil, and you don't want to drop them down into one of the oil return galleys. If you're working on the exhaust valve, there's an oil return hole. Make sure you put something in there. I usually use a little bolt with a string or a little bolt with a piece of safety wire or something. You want to plug that hole because if you drop a half ring down there, it's going straight in your motor, and you don't want to do that. Now that you've got the closing shim off, you're going to make a measurement with it. You use the two special tools that come from Ducati. Measure those together, and that will give you the tool size. $10 millimeters. So now we got 10 millimeters on the tool size. Now you're going to take your shim, place it between there, make sure all the dirt and oil and everything's out of there, because if you get a little piece of dirt, believe it or not, it'll throw that thing way off. Clean up the shim really good, insert it between the two tools, make your measurement. That'll give you a total size right there. Just deduct the tool size from the total size. That'll give you your shim size. Now we know how much we want to try and build up in clearance, which is 0.15. So we're going to find a shim that's 0.15 bigger than the one we have right now. Get the right size shim. Double check the measurement on the shim, always, because they get mixed up. They're not marked. There's no markings on them at all. Make sure you re-measure them
double check your sizes. Now as we've double checked the size, we're going to put it back on. You slide the shim back onto the valve stem. Put it down there, lift up on the valve a little bit with the tool that's through the spark plug hole. Put your little half rings back on. If you put a little grease on them, they'll stay in the slot a little bit better, but a little easier to do. Once you got them in the slot, lift up on your closer, that'll lock them in place. Take your thumb, push down on the valve again, and pull out your closing tool. Now you're going to spin the engine back up the top dead center again. You can leave the rocker arm off to one side. You're going to double check what you just did. You should be able to spin your shim. Should feel some tension, but definitely not too much. Push down on it. You should not feel any movement at all. You should not be able to push it. Shouldn't hear any clicking. Once you've got the closing shim adjusted right, then you can go to the opener. Very important to always do the closer first. Put the opening shim back on top of the valve stem. Same thing, move the engine around a little bit so you can slide the rocker arm back over on top of it. Once you've slid it on top of there, now you can check for your adjustment there. Make your measurement. Alright, we've checked our clearance on the valve and it's 0.10 where we want it to be. If it was not 0.10, say if it was 0.20, we need to bring it down to 0.10. So what we need to do is take the shim out, measure it, find the shim that is 0.10 bigger than that one. Put it back in, double check our measurement. We should be right on target for the proper clearance for an intake valve.
Great.
There's 2 thrust washers on each side. There may be some adjustment shims on one side of it towards the head, but there'll be 2 bigger thrust washers. Thrust washers are bigger than the adjustment shims. Make sure they're separated. Sometimes when you move the rocker arm over, they stick together from the oil. Push your spring clip, make sure it seats real good on the rocker shaft. And then you can move on to your next valve.
This is an addendum for people with either older Passos or older bevel drive motors or Pantas or something like that. The way they don't have the quick release clip on the rocker arm, so now you're forced to remove the pin and the whole rocker arm every time you want to make an adjustment. So once you make an adjustment, you're going to take off these 4 screws that hold the cam end cover on. There's a bearing in here. And actually you can tilt this cover and get to it. Then you need to use your pin removing tool screw that in there. And extract the pin. Hold your rocker arm. Now there'll be shims on both sides trying to fall down. So you got to really keep track of stuff. Take the rocker arm and there'll be shims on both sides. So you got to make, and they'll probably fall down, so make sure you measure, watch which ones fall where. Okay, now you'll change your shims as you need to. Now for reinstalling this, say you already changed your closer, same as the other bikes. Now you're doing the opener. Check your clearances. Looks good. Okay, now we need to put it all back together. So, take our shim alignment tool, start that in, Take the shim that goes on that side of the rocker arm, set it there. Put the rocker arm in. Take our other shims. Once they're all lined up, remove that and insert the rail pin. Sometimes it won't unscrew, so you need to grab it lightly. Just to break that loose. Make sure it is all the way in. Every time you do this, make sure you replace this gasket. And there may be a little shim on here. Shim on the end of the cam. Sometimes it sits on there. If you want to take it off there, put it on the cam first.
Before you put the valve covers on, don't forget to remove the plug out of the oiled drain hole. You don't want to leave that in there because it'll fill up your valve cover with oil and that will cause a lot of problems. Okay, now we're ready to adjust your cams. Now that your valves are all dialed in, we need to set those cam belts. First thing you're going to do is remove the covers on the 750. Take off the covers. On the 900s, you can just take off that little inspection cover plate. It's real easy. Cam belts normally only last between, I'd say, for the 2 valve motors, about 2 years or 10,000 miles. And the 4 valve motor is a little shorter. I mean, it's cheap insurance. Change those belts, you know, definitely 2 years, because it's a lot cheaper to put a new belt on than it is to buy a set of valves and a piston.
This tool is for adjusting your cam belts. Sort of like a fish scale, but, well, pretty much is a fish scale. Spring, and when we do the cam belts, you can see we put this on the pulley, pull until you reach your proper tension mark right here, and then you lock down your lock nuts and your belts are adjusted properly.
Loosen up the adjusting bolts. There's 2. One is a fixed bolt, one is on the pivot. You want to loosen both of those up. Put your little belt adjusting tool, put it on there, pull it tight till the tension mark, and then retighten up those 2 locked bolts. After you put the tight lock bolts, remove the tool. Usually, you should have about 5 millimeters. If you took a 5 millimeter Allen, you can slide it between the belt. You push the belt back, you should be able to slide it between the belt and the idler pulley. That's usually a safe way. That's usually the proper tension, right about there. If you make them too tight, what happens is when the engine gets hot, the head expands, the belt gets real tight, and then it could break. So you don't want to do that. And if you have it too loose, it could skip a tooth and bang a valve that way. So belt tension is pretty critical here. Now we've got that done, we're going to button up the valve cover part. Always use new gaskets when you're putting these things on. It's, you know, nothing worse than doing a job and going out and finding out got an oil leak 50 miles. So I always use new gaskets. Clean the thing up real good. Put the valve covers back on. After you got the valve covers back on, we're going to remove the engine turning tool from the bike. Make sure you didn't lose the little O-ring that's behind the inspection cover. And make sure that's in there. Put the inspection cover back on. Tighten up those 2 screws real good and tight. Okay, now we're going to put the shock back on. Make sure we got our jack in place. Take the 2 little O-rings, put them on the both opposite sides of the shock, slide the shock back into position. Slide the upper bolt in. Once you got the upper bolt in, you can lower the bike slowly to line up the rear bolt. Slide the rear bolt in there. Tighten them both up. Lower the jack the rest of the way, and then really crank those things tight. But definitely don't forget those 2 O-rings. What they do is they keep the dirt out from that upper pivot and make it last a lot longer. After you got the shock back in, you want to put the spark plugs back in. And put your battery back in, hook your terminals back up. Make sure you don't forget your vent hose. It's real important on the battery, else you have battery acid flying all over the place. That's definitely no fun. If your bike's got an oil cooler, make sure you got that screwed back on. And all these bolts, you know, just good tension. You can get the torque specs out of the service manual if you're nervous about it, but common sense, just make them tight. And once you got everything up, you want to start it up. Check for oil leaks. Just take a look around, make sure nothing's leaking and everything's running okay. And after that, go out and have fun. Okay, let's go over this one more time real quickly. First thing you want to do is prep the bike. Dead cold motor, remove the seat, flip up the tank, take off all the necessary bodywork. You're going to remove the battery, remove your spark plugs. You want to remove the rear shock absorber on the bike, so you got it up on a jack. You want to drain your valve covers. Make sure you don't make a big mess on that front valve cover. It will leak oil. Remove all the other valve covers. Make sure they're scraped nice and clean. Install your engine turning tool. Line up the pins perfect and make sure that tool's in there nice and tight. Put your cylinder that you're going to be checking on top dead center. Make sure you have it on top dead center for the cylinder you're working on. You're going to have to, switch it between cylinders, re-rotate it, double check it, make sure it's top dead center, compression stroke. Do it 2 or 3 times to make 100% sure, because if you do it wrong, you're going to have some crazy readings. Check your closing rocker arm first on both intake and exhaust valves, then check your opening shims. Once you button it all back up, you want to check your belts, the covers off, or the inspection covers. Either take the whole cover or the little inspection cover off, depending on your bike. Use the fish scale. Make sure when you retighten those things, make sure you pull them, tighten up the lock screws nice and tight. And don't over-tighten those belts. You could have a problem there. And replace your belts around 2 years, 10,000 miles. Cheap insurance, got to do it. Putting the valve covers on. Make sure you use new gaskets for everything. Clean them up real good. Put the shock back on. Do not lose the upper O-rings. Install your spark plugs. Put your battery back in. Make sure you got all the wires that you took off. Put them back on. Don't forget the vent line. Button it back up. Put all your body back on, and you're ready to go.
Well, I hope this video was a help to you. If you need any tools, any help, special parts, shims, we have all that in stock. Any parts or accessories, feel free to give us a call here at Pro Italia and we'll take care of you. Other than that, good luck and get that bike tuned up and take it for a ride.